My name is Jessica Scott Felder, and I'm Assistant Professor of Studio Art at Wofford College. Thank you all for joining today's session, where our panelists, Mr. Karen J. Phillips, Mr. Calvin Claggett, and Mr. David M. Grubb, will engage us in a discussion about how racism operates in sports at various scales in our society and how sports have also been a place of anti-racism activism. We hope that this will provide us with an overview of how systemic oppression and the unequal distribution of power operates to create and perpetuate structures of racial inequity. As a reminder, a prerequisite for attending this session and for engaging in anti-racism work is an understanding of one's own position in a racist society and using your privilege to challenge racism wherever you experience it, in society, in your home, classroom, at work, and within yourself. This acknowledgement of self-awareness and commitment is integral in being able to use your dominant identity to center and uplift marginalized voices as equitable partners in disrupting oppressive systems of inequity whenever present. So I thank everyone in attendance for committing to that fight. In an effort to frame our discussion, first, I will introduce each speaker. Then I will present a series of carefully curated questions to be answered by each panelist, who will then engage in discussion based on submitted questions. Once we have exhausted those questions, time permitting, we will transition to the question and answer portion of the panel. As attendees, you all had the opportunity to submit questions in your registration form for our panelists. However, you can also send questions to our lovely host, Dr. T from the Career Center. Dr. T, can you wave your hand? And Dr. Liebrick from the Department of Sociology and Anthropology. You can submit these privately through the chat feature. After tonight's panel, there will be an option for session attendees to engage in breakout groups. There will be an anti-racism action team organizer in each room to help guide your discussions. Please note that while the panelist discussion and question and answer portion of this session will be recorded, the breakout sessions will not be. Additionally, any attendee who is engaging in disrespectful, harassing, or racist behavior will be removed from the session. A special thank you to Dean Taifa Alexander for her expertise in helping initiate these teach-ins and drafting this script. Now, let me introduce our panelists. Mr. Karen J. Phillips is a dynamic and charismatic sports, race, political, and social issues writer and commentator. The Saginaw, Michigan native currently shares his thoughts as senior writer and editor for Deadspin. Prior to his move to Chicago, he was senior columnist at the Shadow League. Before joining the Shadow League, the S.I. Newhouse School of Public Communications at Syracuse University and Morehouse College graduate, was a columnist for the New York Daily News and served in various editorial roles at Delaware Online and the News Dispatch. Karen is the first African-American to be a member of both the Sports Journalism Institute and the Associated Press Sports Editors Diversity Fellowship Program. In 2019, Karen was named the winner of NABJ's Salute to Excellence Award in the National Newspaper Commentary category. In 2016, he was named Journalist of the Year by the Philadelphia Association of Black Journalists. Karen has made numerous media appearances on TV, radio, and digital platforms such as The Tamron Hall Show, Sister Circle, CBS News, CNN, ESPN Radio, HLN, MSNBC, BuzzFeed's AM2DM, etc., speaking on topics including sports, race, politics, culture, sports, social media, and current events. Now, Mr. Claggett. A native of Chattanooga, Tennessee, Mr. Calvin Claggett is a two-term graduate of East Tennessee State University with a Bachelor of Science degree in Sociology and a Master of Education in Student Personnel. He began his career in college athletics at ETSU as a marketing intern and currently serves as the Associate Director for External Operations as his field covers marketing, game day operations, sponsorship activation, ticketing, development, and fan experience. Calvin is recently tapped to be the head of equity and inclusion for ETSU Athletics and serves as a member of ETSU's Equity and Inclusion Council. From organizing department-wide diversity training, initiating voter registration drive for his student athletes, where 100% of all TSU student athletes are now registered to vote, implementation of the WIN campaign, What Important Now through Jerseys for Social Justice, to building his department's strategic plan for equity and inclusion, Calvin is committed to efforts of improving the culture in college athletics. Mr. David Grubb, born in Detroit and raised in New Orleans, David Grubb has nearly 20 years of experience in journalism, broadcasting, and communications. As an alumnus of Edna Carr High School and Wake Forest University, David began his career in front of the camera as a sports reporter and anchor for Clax TV in Alexandria, Louisiana, and WGGB TV in Springfield, Massachusetts. After a diversion into public relations and marketing for both the public and private sectors, he rejoined the sports world in 2013 as a sports information director for Southern University at New Orleans in the Gulf Coast Athletic Conference, as well as being a regular contributor to sportsnolia.com. Since that time, he's grown into a multimedia presence, covering Louisiana State University athletics, high school football, and primarily as a New Orleans Pelican beat writer for the Bird Rights and Crescent City Sports. In August of 2019, David became the first African-American to host a daily sports show on a major affiliate in the city of New Orleans when his show, Hard in the Paint with David Grubb, debuted on WODT. In July of this year, HITP moved to a daily podcast. David's work has been featured on NBA.com, Fox Radio, CBS Sports, and has been recognized multiple times for his coverage of the Pelicans. Earlier this year, his podcast interview with athlete activist Mahoud Abdul Rauf was among those recognized by the National Association of Black Journalists for its coverage of race and sports. David lives in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, with his wife, Desiree, and his daughter, Nathalia. Thank you all for joining us tonight. So, to provide you background on tonight's title, we are going to show a short clip that inspired our title.
We're going to create a new banner. This is a Jump Doc alert. Ding, 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 ding. NBA superstar LeBron James is talking politics again.
I know you guys are excited to see her. I didn't know you guys were excited to see me too. But, thank you. As much as you guys would love to hear from me, I would much rather love to hear from our next president, Ms. Hillary Clinton.
Now a historic moment. We can now project the winner of the presidential race. CNN projects Donald Trump wins the presidency.
And this time it's R-rated. Here's his barely intelligible, not to mention ungrammatical take on President Trump and a new ESPN podcast.
The number one job in America, the point of person, is someone who doesn't understand the people and really don't give a about the people.
But wait, there's more gripping insight. ESPN host Carrie Champion asked James and fellow NBA star Kevin Durant about what she described as Trump's racist comments.
I feel like our team as a country is not ran by a great coach. It's not even a surprise when he says something. It's not even a surprise. It's like laughable. It's like,
it's laughable.
It's laughable and it's scary.
But it's also scary.
Right,
because
right.
I shouldn't be numb to your racist comments.
Right.
I shouldn't be numb to your behavior.
I'm numb to this commentary. Like, must they run their mouths like that? Unfortunately, a lot of kids and some adults take these ignorant comments seriously. Look, there might be a cautionary lesson in LeBron for kids. This is what happens when you attempt to leave high school a year early to join the NBA. And it's always unwise to seek political advice from someone who gets paid $100 million a year to bounce a ball. Oh, and LeBron and Kevin, you're great players, but no one voted for you. Millions elected Trump to be their coach. So keep the political commentary to yourself, or as someone once said, shut up and dribble. We'll be right back.
I'm just going to give us a moment. All right, so thoughts. As professionals in the sports world, can you reflect on your thoughts and feelings related to this clip and what it exemplifies about racism in sports in our society and more broadly?
I guess I'll go ahead and dive in. Ms. Ingram's comments, initially, the first thing that jumped out to me were the stigmatized identities that she placed on those men, particularly being that they're uneducated because they play basketball. And LeBron James is uneducated because he finished high school only. When some of the most brilliant minds in this world never sought after higher education. And the second thing is that he was only successful in basketball. You're talking about a man who has experience in media and communications, a man that has experience in the field of education. He's a businessman. And, the third thing is that human rights is never about politics. It shouldn't be about politics. Unfortunately, it is. I want to preface that. Unfortunately, it is in America. We associate that with being incredibly leftist or whatever the case may be. But in actuality, human rights should never, ever, ever have anything to do with politics. It should always be about humanity forward and progression as a country, which to her comments show that she has failed to realize, and that's incredibly sad and unfortunate. And the power that LeBron James, Kevin Durant, Kerry Champion have, it's remarkable that they are using their platform, because oftentimes the backlash from it, being a martyr for fighting the good fight, it's often fatal in ways that, you can lose it all. As we're going to speak later about Colin Kaepernick, or there are people who face death threats. And so I'll digress and let my fellow panelists chime in, but I find it very unfortunate that the stigmatized identities that she placed on those men came from her mouth, but not shocked.
The first thing is that you notice is the code. There's just a lot of coded language, like you said, to either stigmatize or to just diminish the point of view of African Americans. And the thing that's interesting about it is, as we get deeper into this, America has never had a problem using Black athletes for political purposes. Whether you're talking about Joe Louis or Jesse Owens, or, even using George Foreman as a antidote to Muhammad Ali and to the movement at the '68 Olympics in Mexico City. America has never had a problem using Black athletes when it suits their political purposes. But it doesn't matter the venue. It doesn't matter whether it's sports, whether it's business people, whether it's entertainers of any type. It's what your message is. Because when Kanye West speaks out and says things that they agree with, then they're happy to put Kanye on the air. When people in the entertainment industry, when you see a Kid Rock, or you see the Motor City Madman, Ted Nugent, there you go. You see Ted Nugent, these people are getting invites to the White House and able to speak on behalf of their party and their interests, and no one criticizes them. They are given that opportunity and given that platform willingly. But for African Americans, it does not matter the venue. it has nothing to do with venue. It has everything to do with what you're saying. And it's just a way to diminish Black thought and Black expression in these realms by framing it as no matter where you are unqualified to discuss your own condition in this country.
Well, like I actually love watching that clip. And every time I see it, like I think it's one of the funniest things of the last 5 years to ever like come on TV, given how stupid and factually incorrect it is, because it's always a flaming example of how terrible and mediocre everybody is at Fox News. For one, LeBron James does not make $100 million a year to play basketball, which was a quick Google search he could have did. For two, he did not try to leave high school early. He graduated on time. Three, she said millions voted for Trump. Trump lost by over 3 million votes to Hillary Clinton. Trump won the Electoral College. These are just basic fundamental things that like middle schoolers know or have access to. But you have someone who has their own show on one of the top, cable news networks, and they get to say things like this. And listen, I'm an opinion writer. I'm fine with people having their own opinion. But what I've learned over the years is that your opinion doesn't necessarily have to be right or it could be a fact. Because if you tell me that the sky is red, that is your opinion. But that does not mean that it is a fact and that I have to respect it or believe in it. So that video is always just a good chuckle and laugh I always have, just because it encompasses everything that we're going to discuss tonight and just tells us how we got here in the first place.
Thank you. It's really interesting to think about this idea that these issues don't exist on the playing field, this idea that the bodies that are in those spaces don't carry their own narratives with them, and issues that they're affected by don't enter them when they're in those spaces. So I want to kind of continue with that idea. I think David kind of brought it up and Calvin brought it up in regards to the human rights issue. This is about human rights. Some people might say that the playing field is a great equalizer, that sports are neutral, and that watching a game is an escape from reality. However, we know that critical studies of sports point out that issues like racism and sexism show up and are even amplified on and off the field. How would you respond to someone who says that there should be a separation between the athlete and social activism? For instance, those who have called out Colin Kaepernick, Ariana Smith, Muhammad Ali, Tommy Smith, John Carlos, in addition to LeBron James and many, many others for being too political.
Let me say this. Sports has always been political. Always. It is, as long as that from the very institution of professional sports and collegiate sports in this country, you had rules that barred African Americans from participating. You had, you could go back to the Kentucky Derby and the banning of black jockeys. You can talk about Jack Johnson being persecuted and still to this day having to fight to clear his name almost a century after he died, for taking a white woman across state lines. Sports has always been inherently political. So when people say you try to divorce the two, you can't divorce those things any more than you could divorce them from any section of your life. Wherever you have a workplace, there are going to be political issues. There are going to be things that people have to deal with and grapple with. So to say that those things should be separate is just denies American history, first and foremost. Second, to say that sports are a meritocracy is a lie. It's not a meritocracy, because there are plenty of athletes that we know, and Colin Kaepernick would be one of the names that always pops first and foremost to mind, that are more talented than other people who don't have positions playing their sport. It's not in hiring. We know it's not a meritocracy. One of our biggest mottos is it's not what you know, it's who you know. That in of itself eliminates the idea of a meritocracy. Sports can be on the field, you can't hide. But what goes on, the politics of how a locker room is made up, how an organization is built, Those people bring in their own prejudices and how they assemble those things, how they view players, how owners talk to players. You know, the conversations you could, as an example, in North Carolina when Cam Newton was drafted and he was asked whether or not he had tattoos. Those are things that are not asked of white players. So that incident of race, that its intersection is always there. And to ask people in a locker room who are men who live their own lives. You bring what you have in your life with you to your workplace. So again, to act like those things are absent in locker rooms and should be removed from the world of sports, again, I find that notion silly. And then the last part to me of that, it's an escape from reality. Those are real people playing in these games. Those are real people competing. That's not an escape. Acting, watching a movie, that's an escape. Listening to music, that's an escape. But athletes are on the field competing. Those are human beings on all these levels, whether it's high school, collegiate, the NFL, or whatever. Those are real people who are competing and getting hurt and living, waking up each week and dealing with all those things. And I think for people to say it's an escape reality is, again, an attempt to dehumanize athletes and to make them commodities and simply products rather than acknowledge their humanity, which is something that for 400 years now, Black people have been struggling with in general.
And to take David's point even further, like the politicization of sports isn't just an American thing. Like that's how sports started. If we go back to the Olympics in the Roman Empire, like the Olympics started because the Romans were like, hey, we got the best people that can do stuff. We're going to put on these tournaments in this big ass arena to show the rest of the world how mighty we are as a political region and a force. So it goes all the way back to just how the origins of this started. So they've always been intertwined and, joined at the hip. And to answer your question, Jessica, any person that says there should be a separation, I would tell you it's either white or a Black Republican. Because the escape for us, there is none. Because while I might want to watch a game and just relax, while I'm watching this NFL game, I'm also wondering, like, how come that Black offensive coordinator hasn't gotten a head coaching job yet? And then we know why. Or I'm watching a NBA game and they got Black Lives Matter on the court, but I'm like, next season, I bet you it won't be there. It's cooled down. So the escape isn't for anyone who looks like me unless they vote red. So that's my answer to that question.
Yeah, I 100% agree and want to piggyback a little bit more about what Karin said about particularly a point that a lot of professional athletes, and even I see it working in college athletics now. You said why that Black offensive coordinator has not gotten a head job yet, or why are you working so hard on the field with your Black brothers and sisters? But if you look in the front office, or if you look in the administration at the collegiate athletics level, and there's nobody that looks like you. And so essentially, and I say this all the time, but the sports arena is built like a plantation. And it's simply, what can you do for me now with I feel very little return. And there's very little investment in the minority community, which is absolutely tragic. But I've always had a problem with the number of minority athletic directors across collegiate athletics, and how many Black NBA, MLB, NFL GMs or presidents, or even, let's go a step higher, executive vice presidents, owners, things like that, right? Very few and far between. And so to sit here and say that you should separate the two, when essentially, not saying that it's slavery, but I mean, essentially it's kind of a very similar concept, right? You're here to work for me, but we're not here to advance you. We're not here to invest in you so that you can have this front office position, right? You see how many Magic Johnsons are there really out there, right? Like, people say, oh, but you got Magic Johnson. They're quick to throw that out there. And it's like, no. Magic Johnsons are few and far between, and they don't exist. And if you go down to the collegiate level, the disparities are even worse. And I get it from my student athletes all the time, where, currently I am the only Black administrator in the department. And they say, you know, we have to hire more people that look like us. And back to, you know, the social activism of it is because they're feeling thoughts, emotions that, like, just like David pointed out, these are humans going through very real emotions and experiences on and off the field. And so you can't separate that one bit. And to have people there that understand and to encourage them when they're down or feeling pain and agony in their emotions is very, very important.
And let me add this, you know, owners don't have to separate their politics.
Correct.
You know, you just saw the reports from 538 about how NBA owners spend their dollars, and they're overwhelmingly, outside of Steve Ballmer, giving their money to causes that are antithetical to what their players want. So,
Correct.
but no one has said a word about what owners do who have far more influence because they use their dollars and have those resources to influence policy. And I'm sure we'll get into it further about it as we get into these other parts of the discussion. But that part too, the hypocrisy of allowing owners to be political, to donate money to the president and do all those things and be lauded for that. Whereas the players, who are just as much citizens as everybody else, are treated as if they have no business discussing this at all.
Correct. And it's perplexing to think that that they're expected to keep hush in moments and times like this, particularly when we're trying to make strides as a country. But just like you pointed out, the ownership, who has every resource available to them, will use their flex and power on legislation that sets their athletes and then that the communities that their athletes come from back generations. You get what I mean? It's just, for me, I'll never be able to understand it.
It seems as if it's cyclical and it's self-referential in a way. I think Karen's point in looking back at earlier histories of sports and gladiators and coliseums and things like that is a great place to kind of look further back, but also looking at our own country's relationship in regards to slavery. And so looking at that history. So that leads us to our next question. Racism is certainly not new in the United States, but the past 5 years, and especially the past 6 months, there has been growing momentum around Black Lives Matter and Say Her Name, with activists calling on the nation to address systemic racism and violence at every level and in every institution. What are your thoughts on how national sports leagues, especially the NBA and NFL, have responded to anti-racism activism like Black Lives Matter?
It's whack. It's whack. It's doing it for clout. We mentioned Colin Kaepernick earlier. I'm not saying he's lost everything, because, you know, granted, Nike helped pick him up and allotted him resources and things so that he can keep his vision and mission going. But they're doing it right now because it's a thing. And like Carlin said earlier, they got Black Lives Matter on the court right now, but I bet you it won't be there next year.
Nope.
And look at the NFL, those little print in the back of the end zone in the NFL.
What they have on the helmets and things like that. I mean, it's so lame to do it now that everybody wants to talk about it and everybody's doing it, right? Where was it? I mean, where has it been in its entirety of the existence of both associations, the NBA and the NFL? And that just goes to show, I'm going to say, making money and having a self-service. I mean, literally, they're just trying to self-service themselves. It has nothing to do with the actual vision and the mission of the movement. It's all self-serving for both associations.
The only league that I actually respect in all of this has been the NHL.
Yep.
Because they didn't even really try. And I can respect that. They were like, look, it ain't no black people who play hockey. It's a couple in this league. We ain't doing none of that. And I was like, you know what, NHL, I can respect that. Because when baseball had entire rosters trying to kneel. I laughed and wrote columns ripping them, especially when you think how baseball is America's pastime to the T when you think about the game that America loves the most at its purest form was literally stolen from the Negro Leagues, and is now doing all that they can to keep Black people from playing that sport. The NFL is just a walking fumble because they just love to do everything wrong at every turn, which makes the NBA actually look good compared to the NFL because the NBA just doesn't, pull a plexical burst and shoot themselves in the leg. They just don't do stupid. But if you actually pay attention to the NBA, they aren't really that progressive. They're just really progressive compared to everybody else. And so it's one of those things where we have to read between the lines. Like, stuff will be really splashy and stuff. Like, the NFL has in racism, and it takes all of us on the end zones. Who is us? Because I didn't do anything that started this. And how are you going to have an end zone that says in racism where the dude who took a knee, y'all are still blackballing? So I don't know how you do both of these, which is why, again, like, I tipped my head to the NHL because at least they were honest about not caring. And while it's just as whack as everyone else is, at least I can respect that they weren't even going to jump through the hoops and fake it.
The NFL and Major League Baseball are the representatives of America. That what they present is supposed to be the assurance. That's why there was more pressure in my mind from political pressure for the NFL to get going and for baseball to get going than there was for the NBA. You saw why there's been this push to get college football, to get the NFL, to get baseball going. And all of those were to present a certain image of America. It puts things back in my mind, the view of how things are supposed to be. The players are on the field, the people who have been in charge. It is a representation of the order, the natural order of this country. And that's why those two leagues can be more conservative in how they approach it, can be more like baseball in and of itself. Like, as Karen said, they've whitewashed their game quite literally. The unwritten rules are meant to minimize Black expression, Latino expression within the game. Those things the way that they dealt with this throughout the summer was almost non-existent. You see what the NFL has moved on to breast cancer and has put far more effort in publicizing breast cancer awareness than they ever put into the first few weeks of the season in their supposed anti-racism campaign. That is gone by the wayside. You don't see mentions of it in the pregame shows anymore. You don't see any conversation about what the league is doing. And quite frankly, when you look at the NBA and they talk about spending $300 million over the next 10 years, that's less than, that's $1 million a team for the next 10 years. That's nothing. That's nothing. These owners are raking in billions, and yet they're talking about their 1 million donation per team is going to do something other than just be a temporary salve. And that's what all these things are about. The momentum is gone. The momentum is gone. We've seen in the polling that the attitudes that you see in this country are back to what they were before George Floyd died. So the leagues and the political structure, to me, they achieved what they wanted. The distraction of getting players back on the field eliminated the discussion. And you still don't have any substantive changes that have been placed on the table for us to see on how leagues are going to do their business better. We haven't seen a single hard plan on this. And so to me, the leagues will move on. And particularly once the election cycle is over, they no longer have any impetus to bow to the players, to try to be deferential to them, because quite frankly, you have labor you have labor negotiations on the horizon for the NBA. You have labor negotiations on the horizon for Major League Baseball. They're far more concerned about any of those things than they are about social justice or ending racism within their sports.
You also have to remember that it was a rush to get people on the field to play football because we're the only country that actually plays this game called football. Nobody else does it. Like, college football is entering right now as the Big Ten starts this week and the Pac-12 the week after. This is the 151st season of college football. The NFL is at its 101st. We're the only ones dumb enough to play this games, reduce, run around and crash into each other and get CTE and still sign up to play this. No one else does this. Like rugby overseas where they don't wear pads is safer than college and high school and even Pop Warner in the NFL football. So it just goes to show you that even though we're talking about these very complex things, at our heart, this is a country that still signs up to play a very dumb and violent sport just because that's what we do in America is tackle people.
Well, wow. I mean, I don't even know if I should be a Falcons fan anymore after that, but oh man.
You should have gave up on the Falcons a while ago.
Okay. It seems like that's a common consensus amongst our panelists. I'm gonna have to revisit that. I'm on ATL though, all day, every day. So I would like to take a moment to remind all of our viewers to please send in some questions. We do have some space for your questions or comments. So please feel free to send those in. But so going to our next question, in regards to college sports, you've got a lot of young athletes at the collegiate level looking at the pros. I mean, that's oftentimes what inspires them to continue to aspire to be an athlete, is looking at the pros. So as many of us in the Zoom meeting are at an institution that has NCAA Division I sports teams, what advice would you give to the administration or to any administration about athletes wishing to use their platform as players to advocate for social justice and speak out against systemic oppression?
I'll go ahead and answer that first. Main thing is keeping the conversation going. And for our student athletes, supporting them and all of their emotions, thoughts, and feelings. But furthermore, what action are you going to put in place to ensure? We just spoke briefly about not necessarily seeing the actual plans that these pro teams have with this, $300 million that the NBA is going to invest, or whatever the case may be. But it's more so, what are you going to do, how you're going to do it, and when you're going to do it. And particularly at East Tennessee State, we are committing right now to increasing our minority hiring in the next 5 years, which is going to be a part of our entire strategic plan as a whole department. But there's other things, right? If we're going to say Black Lives Matter, then what projects are we going to do with underrepresented and underserved communities in the Johnson City region? It pretty much is all about action, right? And yes, you keep the conversation going, but talk is cheap. And I've met with our athletic director multiple times about, for us to, even though we're going through COVID, everybody's budget is a wreck. You know what it's like, but putting the money where the mouth is. And if we can change the lives of the young people in the community in our region, that's Black Lives Matter. And I think one major thing, if I don't know if Wofford has it, I've seen different Power 5 schools do it. Granted, it's all about resources, what you may or may not have available, but start a unit of equity and inclusion in your athletic departments. That's incredibly important. That doesn't report to the athletic director, right? We have a VP of equity and inclusion. That's who I report to in these matters, right? Because you have to hold the department and the AD accountable. And I know that's a tough pill to swallow, to have somebody who works for you, but at the same time can ping you at any given moment to relinquish that power. But that's something that every collegiate athletic department should do, is to have that entity in place so that it protects the best interest of those who are underserved.
Jessica, you ask a really good question because we're in the moment where some and many of us are asking, what do I do now? What's next? How can I help? And my answer is always this. You all are at a school that's in South Carolina, so I'm going to ask this question. You're probably going to look at me like I'm crazy, but I have a point. Stay with me. How many of you all eat barbecue? Or if you're vegan, eat something with some barbecue sauce. It's South Carolina. Somebody got to be eating some ribs, some brisket or something. Okay, cool. Then you know that you can't eat barbecue with like a knife and a fork. You have to use your hands. It's going to be sauce everywhere. It's going to be sticky. You got to suck your fingers. Well, that's what dealing with race is like. Dealing with race is like eating barbecue. You can't be cute when you do it. You can't have on a little bib or a napkin and try to slice it up with a salad fork and be all bougie and pretentious and all of that. No, you got to like suck on the bone, suck your finger, get to the gnaw, the bone marrow. Don't leave no meat on the plate because your parents is like, you wasted my money. That's what dealing with race is like. So when people ask, what should I do or what should these schools do? My answer is, if you're not going to get messy and down to the bone with it, don't do it. Stay out of it. Like, this isn't the meal or the topic for you. I understand you want things to be better, and I get it. But we're at a point in 2020 that if you're not going to jump in the foxhole with this, then stay out, because there is no nice way that you can deal with race and still try to be cute.
I mean, you take examples like what Dabo Swinney, his comments this summer, where he talked about that he doesn't believe, well, of course I believe Black Lives Matter, but I don't believe in Black Lives Matter. Well, then you're not on the side of your players. Nick, and I had a problem with watching a lot of college football coaches be in the front of marches on their campus with their student athletes. The coaches shouldn't have been in the front. The players, the Black players in particular, this is something where Black people are supposed to be in the front. If we were talking about women's issues, I would expect women to be in the front and leading that conversation as an ally. And when people talk about allyship, ally is an active term. It is not a passive term. You cannot be an ally with your good feelings. Allyship comes with your work. And what we see with these coaches is a lot of well wishes. And we see from these athletic departments are a lot of well wishes, but we don't see action on behalf of their players. Their players are not empowered to speak up. Their players know that if they were to say, and we've seen it, we've seen backlash from players who spoke up and said, my coach didn't do this. We saw it at Florida State where the players had to contradict their coach, say he didn't talk to us individually about what's going on. But what is the punishment? There is still very much, and like Calvin said, that plantation mentality of you don't speak, your scholarship can be pulled at any time. It is a year-to-year contract, and people don't understand that people think you get that for 4 years. And schools use this to silence dissent. And this goes back a long time. And there are very few coaches who at the very bare minimum, and I'll say this about like a John Wooden, who at the bare minimum didn't understand everything that a Kareem, that Lou Alcindor and Bill Walton were talking about while he was at UCLA, but he didn't get in their way. He said, he let them go to protest. He didn't stand in their way. And I think that's the first thing is coaches got to get out the way, let the players lead, let them drive this discussion and have people on their side to facilitate this, because the biggest thing to come out of this had better be on the collegiate level is player empowerment. They have to have a seat at the table, because what we have exposed, something that we've already known, is that these are employees. And now more than ever, they have to find some way to unionize and have representation at the table on their behalf, someone who can stand up for them. College athletes need a Marvin Miller, not just for their rights as players, but for Black athletes to speak up about this system, because it's not going to change otherwise. The NCAA is not in the business of changing.
But David, to your point, you said something, and I agree with you, but if we're going to actually like fix this, like the Black players can't be in front. The white players need to be.
I understand exactly.
Like the same way with these women's rights. These women
I
are
understand.
tired. They need us as men to be in front. We should be the ones pissed off for them if we want things to change. And like, I totally agree with you, but I'm like, look, if you want to be my ally, you need to be side by side at minimum, and in majority in front if we really want stuff to actually change.
Oh, I mean, I understand. I think we mean the same thing, but I'm just saying that visually, when you see the coach leading these black players, the optics of it to me, especially when these coaches are coming. I mean, we had Ed Orgeron here, and I got in trouble for criticizing him because he goes on College Game Day and he's like, racism got to go. And I told people, I said, this is not a slogan. This is not driving out litter. This is an American problem. And you're treating it like it's something like it's you playing against South Carolina. No, you can't be on TV talking about racism got to go.
Like it's a fly in your bedroom.
I think you hit it on the coffin, man. It's you see these head coaches and they get on, College Game Day or CBS Sports or whatever, and they have their punchline, right? Like it's been rehearsed, but they also miss the opportunity, if they are a true ally, to really show the world their heart and their morals and beliefs about the situation. And to go back to what we were talking about, particularly the student athletes having a seat at the table, that was my first thing. Was like, bam, like we gotta have our student athletes. And so we took one member from every single team, and pretty much as an advisory council, right? And I say this, every athletic director is one situation or one scandal away from being fired. That is a very real thing. And so the way, and I had to have this conversation with our athletic director, right? The way you, not just saying he should handle it X, Y, and Z to preserve his job, but at the same time, if your student athletes go out and do whatever the case may be, or they react in a way because of your negligence or lack of action, like you see the incident that happened with Missouri and Jonathan Butler, starved himself until the university president, the university system president stepped down, right? These student athletes have more power now. And so I want to disagree with you a little bit, Dave. I think, and seeing it more than ever now, these kids realize that we don't give a damn about the donors. We don't care about the system anymore, right? They are more empowered today than they were when I originally started working in college, and you all could probably say the same. So it's two things. Every athletic director is one scenario, one incident away from being fired, losing his job. And number two, the way he reacts and responds in support of his student and athletes and being unapologetic about it. I think that's the thing. And that's the word that I used with RAD. I said, and he was scared. He had all these thoughts, feelings, emotions about, what if I say the wrong thing? I'm a 40-year-old white man. I don't know. And just like you said, you gotta be willing to step in that conversation all in or all out. Don't sit here and walk a gray area, but when you step all in, you be unapologetic about it. And I think that has helped change the culture and the narrative, particularly being in East Tennessee, where things are pretty scary around here. And we already know the thoughts that come with being Black in East Tennessee. And I'm pretty sure you all can say the same fairly in South Carolina. It takes action and really truly being about it. And like, Carl said, like, hey, if you ain't willing to step in it, don't even step in it at all. Step fully in it, don't step in it at all.
I'm gonna never look at barbecue the same way again after that. To be honest, I mean, it really does take resilience and I think determination for this to actually, have impact. So we do have about 5 more minutes left. I would like to open up the floor to our panelists to see if there's anything else that they would like to kind of expand on or touch on. So again, we do have about 5 minutes.
If I would say that my biggest concern going forward is, are we going to play a game where we try to fix something that inherently doesn't work? The world is different now. And like you said, we do have more athletes who are empowered, who have their money, who have the position to do something. The NBA, the NFL, Major League Baseball don't have to be the only games in town. Not anymore. The world is different. It's smaller. It's easier to get coverage. There are more outlets for broadcasting, and eyes go where the talent goes. Mm-hmm. And when I watch, I want to see what high school athletes do going forward, because we made a big deal about a 5-star player going to Howard. Well, that's one, and that's fantastic for Howard to get one. Even if they get 2, that's great for that year. But is that real change at a deeper level? Are kids still going to go to Clemson, still go to Bama, they will. And what will change? Will there be more Black assistants in Power 5 conferences? Will there be Black head coaches in Power 5 conferences? But we're going to steady see a stream of these kids who are exploited by that system going to it. And we're going to steady see people asking the NBA or asking the NFL for concessions that they are not willing to make. So at some point, do you choose to continue to participate, or do you start to think about what are our other options to create something that is going to work? And that does not mean excluding anyone, because I would guarantee that there are white, Hispanic, Asian business folks who are just as interested and willing to get into professional sports, or to do like the G League or the Professional Collegiate League are doing, and create different venues for athletes outside of the traditional structures to empower themselves and make money. So I think that's what's the next step going forward as far as athletes at the major sports levels is, if you don't see that substantive change from ownership and from the league offices, what are you willing to do to stand firm on your ideals?
Excuse me. I would add that going from this moment, I don't expect anything to change. And I'm not just talking about sports or politics or culture. I'm talking about our society as a whole. Now, I think things will change in a post-COVID world, if a post-COVID world ever happens. I think those things will change. But this racial reckoning that's happened in this country in 2020, I don't really expect much to change, because we keep saying this phrase, let's get back to normal. Getting back to normal means going back to the way this was before 2020. And since everybody wants to get back to normal, that means they want to get everything back to normal. This is a country, America is like a surfer. It loves to ride waves. And the wave this year has been race and social issues. But when that wave dies out, then what's the next wave this country is going to jump on? And so you look at these things and you just wonder, like, okay, will there be some progress? Probably a little bit, but it reminds me of like a funeral. And if you've ever had like a close relative or someone pass, it's like when they die and the funeral happens, like all these people are calling you, they're coming over, they're bringing food to the house, everyone's asking you how you're doing, holding you up. And it's all this flow of love and emotion. Everyone wants to put their arm around you and they're checking on you. And then like 2 months later, everybody's gone because they have to get back to normal. But if you've lost someone, you live a new normal. And it doesn't mean that they might necessarily care, but the amount that they care isn't the same as it was 2 months ago. And that's why I feel like fall 2021, fall 2022. We'll be right back here having this exact same panel talking about what happened, where did we drop the ball, why hasn't there been as much progress as we wanted to? Was just because everybody didn't want to buy in and eat the barbecue.
No, I agree with that 100%. You know, we've said it multiple times. It's going to take true action, and you know, me at East Tennessee State and everybody, most everybody on this call, at or from Wofford, you know, particularly being at PWIs, predominantly white institutions, we're going to have to change the way we service our students, and we're going to have to change the way that we care for our minority faculty, staff, and administration, and sit down and actually, you know, take steps forward. I think that's and the accountability. I just want to say that the accountability that you hold to your leaders, and that takes courage, and that takes discomfort, but it has to happen. And I'm very proud of the way that, you know, my institution has decided to make strides. Nowhere near perfect, but I want to see the same happen across other PWIs, because I'm not saying that, you know, PWIs are bad places, but, you know, I can speak for some, if not most. I'm pretty sure all of us probably had the thought of, you know, should I go work for a HBCU? Should I up and go? And a lot of that comes with inclusion, right? The thought of inclusion, and which is almost, I know at East Tennessee State it's pretty much it was non-existent. So it's one thing to have diversity. That just is saying you got different people in the room, but who cares about that, right? And inclusion is actually having the influence and impact, and the input on decisions. And that's where we'll see the change.
I'd also like to see, you have to have anger. Things don't change in America without anger.
For sure.
And I'm not saying violence, but anger. People have to be literally, I mean, I could say violence if you want to talk about the history of the country, but look, there has not been a major change in this country that has not come without bloodshed.
Right.
But it does require anger, and particularly, as Karen said, is on the behalf of our white allies. Our anger is muted. If white people don't get angry and take this to the seats of power and start having those, it's, you know, you can't keep framing this as a feelings discussion. This is not about feelings. This is not about liking. This is not about wanting me as your neighbor. This is about the law. This is about my treatment as a citizen. So, you know, as long as they can keep making this about feelings, people could justify it and say, well, I don't have any particularly negative feelings towards Black people, but that's not the conversation we're trying to have here. And if you're not willing to be, like, white people have to be uncomfortable. They have to be upset. There have to be hurt feelings on that to challenge the notions that you walked into the room with. And if you walk out of it and you don't, that conversation, a lot of it is should be one-sided, quite frankly. It should be a lot of listening rather than going back and forth. And I think that's part of it too, is that, you know, when we use words like, why can't we have more civility? That just means you want silence. Why can't we have normalcy? As Karen said, you want silence. That's all those things are. They're all just euphemisms for acquiescence and silence. And I'm 44 years old, and I've never felt more pessimistic about the future. You know, I have a 12-year-old daughter, and I have to look at her every day. And there are days when I'm like, baby girl, I have no idea. I have no idea what to tell you, because, you know, she cries in my arms and tells daddy why. And I cried those same tears when I was her age, you know, with my parents. And I don't have any more optimism. And Baldwin said we have to either choose optimism or death. I'm trying. I ain't ready to die. But that optimism is hard to hang on to.
David said that was a really nice way of saying stuff only changes in America except when white people get pissed off. Like the Boston Tea Party was some white people that was pissed off and they threw that tea off their boat. The Civil War was a whole bunch of white people pissed off and fighting each other. White women wanted to vote, they got pissed off. They start burning bras and they start marching and stuff changed. If you go through the history of this country, when white people get ticked off, stuff changes. And that is the most positive thing I have seen in this year, even though I feel like it may not necessarily last the way that it should, is that 2020 is the year that white people are really starting to get pissed off. And when white people get pissed off, stuff gets a little better.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I would like to thank all of the panelists for a very energized conversation. This is just very informative. I'm also looking forward to seeing everyone who's here tonight, because I have everybody up on my screen right now. We will have another conversation in regards to collegiate sports on Monday. I also want to recognize the organizers of these anti-racism sessions: Dr. Jim Neighbors, Dr. Rhiannon Liebrick, Dr. Camille Bethea, Dr. Kim Rawson, Dr. Kimberly Hall, Dr. Tasha Smith-Tyus, Mr. James Stoops, Dean Taifa Alexander, Tiara Woney, and Nadia Glover. We would also like to thank Dr. Trina Jones for her support. And now for those who you indicated who you want to engage in the optional breakout sessions, the breakout groups will be based on your responses to the RSVP form. In the breakout rooms, you will have up to 30 minutes to debrief and discuss the session. After your discussion, the Anti-Racism Action Team organizer assigned to your room will dismiss you from the session. Our host will begin that process now. Thank you all for coming and engaging in this work, and I look forward to seeing you all next month.